Did the real estate settlement really make commissions negotiable for the first time? Some headlines and even politicians have said so, but the truth is that's not the case. It's been a year since the settlement, and I'm still getting questions from my buyers at my consultations and sellers at listing appointments asking what really changed. Today, I'm clearing up the myths, explaining the facts, and showing you what it means if you're a buyer or a seller in California. Before we dive in, hit that like button if you've seen all the confusing headlines out there about commissions. It really helps me reach more people who are just as confused as you might be. In this video, you'll learn why the lawsuits happened in the first place, what has actually changed for sellers and buyers, the misinformation the media keeps repeating, and why it matters. I'm also going to give you my honest opinion on the changes, and if you want all the official details, I'll share where you can download the NAR facts and official resources for both sellers and buyers, so make sure to stick around until the end. I'm Nadia with the California Home Collective here in Sonoma County, and I help buyers and sellers navigate through the craziness called real estate, and I believe in clear, honest conversations, and today we're tackling one of the most misunderstood topics, which is commissions. Let's start by going back in time, the lawsuit starting with Sitzer Burnett case, which argued that the traditional way of handling commissions created an unfair structure. Sellers felt forced to pay not only their own listing agent, but also the buyer's agent. Critics said this limited choice and transparency, and the National Association of Realtors eventually reached a settlement agreeing to pay $418 million over 4 years. But more importantly, the settlement introduced new rules to increase transparency and consumer choice. This is where things get really messy. Some media outlets suggest NAR set a standard commission. That was actually never true. NAR does not set commissions. Commissions were negotiable long before this lawsuit, and they remain negotiable today. Now, if this surprises you, let me know in the comments below. Did you think commissions were always set, or did you already know they were negotiable? Because I'm curious how much of the media noise has influenced what people believe. Even former President Biden misspoke when he suggested the settlement made commissions negotiable for the first time. Again, that's not true. Negotiation has always been part of real estate. What has changed are the rules around how commissions are offered, disclosed, and communicated. So what does this mean for sellers? Before I answer that question, let me summarize how our fees had worked up to last year. When a seller called me to sell their house, I would set up a time to go through the entire process of listing their home. That included my fees, and part of my fees is what I would pay the other broker directly. The amount going to the buyer broker was also documented in our MLS, so that the buyer's agents and buyers knew exactly what the sellers would pay for. This broker-to-broker compensation model has since then retired. Now, when I sit down with my seller, I stipulate what my fees are, which do not incorporate buyer-broker fees anymore. I simply explain to the seller that they can probably expect the buyer to ask the seller in the purchase offer to ask the seller to pay their agent fees. The seller will have the option to say yes, no, or partially yes. But there's a key difference. We cannot advertise that on the MLS anymore. MLSs cannot show buyer-broker compensation, so you as a seller still have the choice to offer compensation to a buyer-broker. It's just not readily advertised. But why would you even consider paying the buyer's agent? You're not charity after all. Many sellers do continue to pay because it makes their home more attractive to buyers. You need to realize most buyers will be financing their home. This means closing costs, large down payments, and many buyers who can afford to make monthly payments won't have additional money to pay their agents on top of that. That means you will lose out on a large pool of buyers. So keep an open mind and don't focus on agent fees, but rather on the net amount you will receive. You may have to pay their agent, but what if the purchase offer is otherwise very attractive? Or what if your home has been sitting for 3 months, which is very well possible in today's market, and you then only get one offer which is asking for you to pay their agent fees? You might want to consider that. But on the other hand, what if you get 3 offers, all asking for you to pay their agent fees, but what if all offers are over asking price? My point is, each home sale is very different and unique, and you need to look at the big picture. Here's the good news. You don't need to decide to pay or not pay until offers actually come in. So let me ask you this. If you're a seller watching this, would you still consider covering a buyer's agent fees to make your home more attractive? Drop a quick yes or no in the comments, and I'd love to know how you'd handle this in today's market. Now let's take a look at this from the buyer's perspective, because the changes are even bigger there. You must now sign a written agreement with your agent before touring any homes. That agreement must spell out exactly how your agent will be paid in clear and specific terms. That means it can't just say whatever the seller offers. The agreement must also say that the commissions are fully negotiable and not set by law. Sellers may still choose to offer compensation to your agent, but again, that offer won't be visible on the MLS. It has to be handled off platform, and you will be asking for it in the purchase offer. So the agreement ensures buyers know exactly upfront what they're paying for, what services they'll get, and how their agent will be compensated. Now, here's where I get personal. I understand how this settlement came about and how it does in one way increase transparency. However, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, I believe it also is creating the opposite effect for buyers. So let me explain why. When I have a buyer, they will get pre-approved and tell me what purchase price they want to be at and not exceed. So that is what I would search for. I would also be able to see what my compensation would be from the seller so that I could then already go to my buyer and say they're responsible for a portion, or that they don't need to worry about it because it's fully covered through the transaction. So that was great. We would go see properties, buyer loves it, we make an offer, and buyer closes on the property and goes their happy way. The problem with the new model is that neither I nor the buyer knows if my fees will be paid through the transaction until we actually write the offer and the seller accepts. So let's say my Fountain Grove buyer falls in love with a $1.5 million property, which is top of their price range. We write the offer and the seller decides they won't pay my fees. If the buyer would have known initially that the seller won't pay my fees, and since the home is already at the top of their budget, they probably wouldn't even have considered looking at the home and not falling in love with the home if they would have seen it. Here's another thought. I'm all for buyer-broker agreements between buyers and their agents, and I've actually always implemented those even before the settlement because it establishes a clear relationship between my buyers and myself. It writes out clearly what my duties and responsibilities are towards my buyers, and it clearly states what my fees are in case sellers wouldn't pay. However, and this is a big one in my opinion, and it's again just my opinion. Take this for example. I work with many relocation buyers and buyers I have never met before, and they give me a call asking to see a property. In the past, I have met them at the office and went over the process with them. Some buyers are interested in a longer, more thorough conversation, and some really are just not quite ready to commit to an agent quite yet, as they want to interview, maybe try out how agents perform showings. So I wouldn't insist on them signing an agreement quite yet until they are ready to commit. But I want to obviously prove myself to them that I'm worth hiring, so I go show the property they want to see without that agreement and ultimately let them decide if they're ready to work with me after that. And at that point, I would go over the buyer-broker agreement with them and then have them sign. Well, remember, we cannot show property prior to the buyer-broker agreement being signed anymore. Now I'm asking those potential buyers that don't even know me to marry me for at least 3 months, because that is how long the agreement is for, without them knowing how I actually work. The good news though is that we do have a little mini buyer-broker agreement that lets me show up to 3 properties. So I still need to ask them to date me for a little before the rings actually come on. So to my buyers, how do you feel about having to sign a written agreement before actually touring homes? Do you think it gives you more clarity, or do you feel pressured? Let me know below, because your feedback helps me guide my clients better. Real estate laws and regulations can be complex, from fair housing rules to restrictions on buyer love letters, RESPA guidelines, and even rules disclosing commissions. With the recent settlement, things have become a little more complex, but with the right education, it's completely manageable. What I still don't quite understand though, is why we as real estate professionals can't simply post our fees publicly in the name of transparency. After all, my husband has his mechanic labor rate posted on the wall for everyone to see. Comment below with your thoughts. Do you think real estate agents should be able to post their fees openly? I'd love to hear your opinion. If you want to dive deeper, I've included links where you can download the official NAR article plus resources specifically written for sellers and buyers. And of course, if you're buying or selling in Sonoma County and want a straightforward conversations about commissions, reach out and I'll help you navigate this with clarity.